All right, we're probably about ready to start. I am delighted to be here at the second time of the BRMI conference. I see new faces from the last time I was here. It's wonderful. And to be in the presence of so many people that collectively have such a huge amount of answers. And what happens when we have access to a tremendous amount of valuable information is that it becomes confusing to figure out what to do. There's just such a huge laundry list. So, you know, Dr. Tom, Dr. Odell provided huge, wonderful information that I can build on. And they showed the complexity of what's causing people to be chronically ill, which is where I deal with people who are chronically ill for the most part. And I mentioned this, I think, in discussing this today with several people. We have to have, as a practitioner, we have to have a concept in our mind of what priority systems are. The practitioners so far have mentioned really important things. Dr. Tom mentioned the importance of unconscious memories of trauma and the Dirk Hammer's work. So that's hugely important. So when I see a new patient, one of the first things I do, it doesn't matter what their symptoms are. It could be autism, it could be chronic fatigue where the person can't stand up. I still look at and screen for, are there things in the unconscious mind which are, or are there either physical impact injuries or emotional trauma? And if that's there, there's a chiropractor by the name of Dr. Mortar that spent his whole life developing a system called bioenergetic synchronization technique. It's one of the first. There are several methods of dealing with embedded subconscious memories of trauma. It's just hugely important. So whatever folks want to talk to me later about that, then it's a really important thing to do. But so many procedures in biological medicine, bioregulatory medicine have already been documented. And looking at scar tissue, I do a rapid screening. If you do proper muscle testing, you can go along the teeth very quickly and find out if there's an active focus of infection. You can do it with instruments as well. The point is, you really want to go through these big, huge things at the beginning. So I've been doing that. I began practice in 1978. And I began an herbal company. For the disclosure part of things, I began an herbal company in 1981, which still is an herbal company and is making products that we believe and trust are the best hemp products that can be produced. And I make flower essences, and I'm giving a workshop tomorrow on that. I've developed, I'm the only person that has US and international patents on a way of extracting energy out of flowers. So, but we have continuing ed things, so we can't mention company names. And so the presentation I'm going to give you today, was produced for my company. We've extracted all the names out of there. As far as I know, it's all clean, so we can use this. And I got a PowerPoint here, and I'm going to try and stick to our time. So the PowerPoint is not done the way PowerPoints are supposed to be, which Dr. Tom did the right way. You put 2 or 3 points on the board, and then you do that. I stuck them all together, and I'm just going to have to read a couple of pages. So sorry on that. But we're going to get to the fun part at the end of all this information, which will take 20 to 30 minutes. And then I hope I can bring it together just by more focus on what's important. So, so there are about 500 chemicals in hemp, and it's very hard to figure out what's doing what. When you get that many potentially active substances, it's virtually impossible to figure out what's doing what. So the mainstream pharmaceutical model of health intervention has developed a pattern of reducing complex causes of human illness to a singular diagnosis. That diagnosis, the theory submits, provides a clearly defined entity that can be targeted by a precisely matched drug. Well, I think most of us know that that's probably not a very good way of doing things, because in most cases, as we've seen already, chronic illness has a huge number of causes, and they're additive very often. So when numerous biologically active ingredients in hemp go to work concurrently at the same time, they create confounding variables, making it very hard to figure out what's doing what. And it becomes virtually impossible to scientifically describe what causes what. So human clinical outcome studies employing biologically active substances in biocompatible ways and containing different chemical variations tend to provide more real and useful information from the standpoint of holistic and preventive medicine. It's unfortunate that institutions who conduct the preponderance of cannabis research are significantly funded by and therefore tied to pharmaceutical entities that support their business model by isolating and testing single active ingredients for patent and marketing purposes. So if we ignore the fact that what is being told to us is science, if we ignore the fact of who funds that science, we're really missing something. So when I realized that for my company, I had to produce an authoritative document, which now is 62 pages long, and anybody that wants that can give me an email later, and we'll make sure that you get it. It's basically a booklet, but it's a PDF that contains all, what I believe is all relevant information about the complexity of industrial hemp that I've been able to glean from literally hundreds of documents, research online, and many, many texts. So it is now, having worked with medicinal plants for 40 years, and growing up, you know, like I was in college in 1969 in UCLA, you know, I was in the hotbed of, like, up the way from Berkeley, California. Everybody was, you know, sex and free love and all that. And I was like this kid, like I was sitting in the library studying Peabody Museum in Harvard University, had a wonderful collection of ethnology texts done by anthropologists that had gone around interviewing native peoples in the United States, Indians, and in the late 1800s, early 1900s. These things were a treasure trove of information. So that's what I was doing. I was a recluse, a social misfit due to the emotional trauma that I had as a kid. There's no way in the world I should be alive. I fell off a 2-story building to begin with. You know, it's just, I got angels, and I think a lot of us in here do. And so I attribute an awful lot of the guidance that I get to my friends upstairs. I call it my steering committee. And I don't think we want to overlook that. And you don't have to exclude science and intelligent rigor. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think if you look back in the history of medicine, many of the great luminaries really attributed a lot to higher guidance. So I want everybody to pay attention to this next two things. And again, if you want this, I didn't find these 2 quotes until about 3 months ago. And this is the most important thing. When I'm in Nashville in my practice 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and it's getting better. But Nashville is not a progressive city if you compare it to Boston or LA or San Francisco, any of the West Coast cities. So it's getting better now. Most of the people that walk through my door, I don't have to fight with them, but I still get the women. I got my practice is 70% women, probably, and I think that's pretty common. There's more women that seek alternative care than men. But there's this group of guys, and I don't know if they're all in the insurance industry in Nashville, which is in the hospital industry, that the wives come in and they say, yeah, well, my husband doesn't, you know, he wants a real doctor, and he wants science. Okay, so for any of you that want to address the issue of ridiculousness of this whole medical situation, look at these quotes. Now, it is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. Now that's the most prestigious AMA, but that's probably the most prestigious journal in the United States. That lady is Dr. Marcia Engel. When I checked, she was 81 years old and was still teaching classes as a professor emeritus at Harvard. I don't know if she still is. But for anybody that lives in Boston and you look up this lady, she is a cool person. How she was able to edit the New England Journal for 2 decades and tolerate it, but when she left, she was able to write that. Okay, so that's on this side of the pond. So if we go to the other side of the pond in England, this is even more amazing. The case against science these are quotes. The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analyses, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession, I love this language, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn toward darkness. You know, and we really, okay, so, and I'm going to get back to the subject at hand, but I want you to write down these two things. Please, please, please. Watch, if you have any time, and I don't watch any mainstream media because I could never handle the pharmaceutical ads, but watch a program that streams on Netflix called Nikita. Not the early one, but there was one that started in 2012 approximately. It ran for 3.5 years. And the last 10 episodes, the fourth year was cut short at 6 seasons, and I think was getting too close to the truth. It's phenomenal about the alternative black ops government. It's what's responsible for all of this stuff. If you just sit, this is what I do a lot, I go through reasoning just why, when, you know, human beings are built to love nurturing, why do we have a world where all these people are killing each other? It's being caused. That's my belief. So anyway, we don't want to get too far into that, but when we look at what's causing people health problems, there's a reason, and very often we're being fed the wrong information, as well as having a lot of things in our environment that are really destructive. So we're going to go over that in a minute. But learn that, and then if you can, and I have no association with this guy, but he's phenomenal investigative reporter, John Rappaport, R-A-P-P, Rappaport. He will send you his newsletter for free. It is tremendous, and this guy's been doing this work for 35 years. The last thing is go on to YouTube and listen to a woman by the name of Catherine Fitz, was an assistant secretary of Human Health and Services or something. She was high in the US government, and listen to this woman who produces something now called the Solari Report, where she's a manager of people with vast wealth. She's a wealth management person. That's what she's done, and she still does. But what she's doing is reporting on why the condition of this world is so bad and is resulting fundamentally in our health problems, if you extrapolate it. All right, so that's just for, you should just know that stuff. When individual compounds in hemp are experimentally investigated in academia, very often they've been chemically manipulated, isolated, and synthesized. Live studies of cannabis biological action is generally conducted on genetically modified mice, very modified. Further, the preponderance of scientific literature citing experimental results of the study of essential oils, terpenoids, found in cannabis is scientifically misleading. So when you look at all these articles, because terpenoids are one of the 3 things in industrial hemp that are very valuable. Well, things like lemongrass and citrus peel, they have limonene. It's an essential oil. But we're going to talk more about this toward the close of this, how important vibrational medicine is. If you take lemongrass and you take cannabis, the vibrational character of the plant is different. So if you take an essential oil from 2 different things on a refined level, it'll be a different vibrational thing. It won't be the same substance, even though it's the same chemistry. The chemistry will show that. So long story short, when you put all this information that I put together in 62 pages, it's really interesting, and it may not be that relevant. All it says is the stuff is powerful. Now, it got famous because of marketing tactics by the largest company now that happened to find, just by chance, and the Tibetans call it accumulated merit. Those 6 brothers that produced the hemp company that makes this, they had accumulated merit because they ran into the right time, perfect timing, and they became a national phenomenon because they were picked up on CNN and reported all over the country. Then they then had 15,000 unfilled orders. 15,000 unfilled orders because they had one girl, one case study that had bad epileptic seizures, and they gave her a concentrate of industrial hemp, and her seizures stopped. So it's building a company on the basis of one case study is pretty cool. I could never do it, but they did. Anyway, and they're good guys. I've met them all, but I don't think they're using the right process to extract hemp, and based on 40 years of doing this, have a pretty good sense about plants, and somehow I came up with a way of extracting hemp in a different way, which we're going to go over. And that makes a huge difference bioenergetically, what it does. So let's see. So So if we're going to try to figure out if something works well in the body, we have to have some way of measuring it. It can be done by proficient applied kinesiology, and I really have to stress proficient. We have a International College of Applied Kinesiology has a register of people that have taken the 100-hour training, and you can go to ICAKUSA.com and look for somebody in your state that's at least had that training. Some of these guys are scary smart. I'm not, but I'm informed, and my brain doesn't work that way. I collect data, and I try and I feel and then test what seems to be relevant, and I don't have an eidetic memory at all, as you'll find out later. Electrodermal screening, there are several people here that are very skilled in this. It's a highly disciplined mental regimen with technology to support it. And then we have a bunch of, which VegaTest I think is probably the best instrument to use, but it's also one of the hardest. And then a bunch of people are using electrodermal screening devices with computerized algorithms, which I don't, they just simply don't stand up. But here's the interesting thing. People using some of these technologies are really helping sick people get well. And that's because my belief of the human interface, their intention working with that machine, which I don't think is very sound technology, still produces good results. So look at the nature of the person. If they're dedicated and selfless and have results, it's fine. It can work. So some way of checking, you have these points active, now you don't have these points active. It can be helpful. And advanced pulse diagnosis in Chinese medicine is absolutely amazing. One of the guys that I studied with and co-wrote a book with was able to take a hold of your radial pulse and then put a substance within your energy field and completely see the diagnostic change in pulse. Well, there's a few people that can do that, but it's really hard to do that. So probably good electrodermal screening or applied kinesiology that's properly done is the best way to do that. But anyway, we have to have something to measure, especially in my case when I'm trying to develop something that's superior. When I knew that I was going through a set of odd serendipity, I became aware of how valuable hemp could be, and I was a pretty strong proponent against recreational drug use because in 1985, I had a run of about 100 people. The universe does this. They send me people. So it's a wake-up call after I see the first one, the second, and number 10, and then I go, oh, why am I seeing all of these things? And what I was seeing was people that had something I called cannabinoid toxicity syndrome, the worst one of which was somebody crawling through my front door in Pasadena, 453 Lake Avenue, Pasadena, where I practiced for 10 years. He crawled through the door, went and creaked, and this guy comes crawling through the door in tears. And he was a 6'2" janitor who couldn't walk. And so we got him, well, we put a walker in front of him and got him to walk back to my office. And there's this big guy kind of blubbering, and he says, I've lost my motor strength. Am I going to be paralyzed? History is so important. So I said, well, what are you doing? Tell me what's going on. Well, this was like on a Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday, and it was Thursday when this whole thing started, the previous week. He said, I really strained my back at work, and it really was hurting, so I went home and I started smoking some joints. Well, it didn't do anything, so I started smoking more, and I just kept smoking more, and that's why I'm so upset, because it didn't get any better, and in fact, it was worse. So at that point, I thought, oh, this is really interesting. Is the additive effect of lots of THC causing this motor weakness? And in fact, it is. You will find this syndrome still in heavy cannabis users. Sometimes that happens. And the simple antidote is basil. I learned that from an Egyptian physician that told me that they antidoted hashish toxicity with basil. So we made a basil product, very helpful to get rid of chronic THC exposure. So hopefully the people using heavy recreational drug use will switch from that into non-THC, CBD-rich industrial hemp. It's much more valuable. And interestingly, if you produce high CBD, it will help knock out THC that is in the nervous system that shouldn't be there. And 15,000 studies done between 1970 and 1985 showed with horrible studies on poor monkeys that they hooked up to smoking machines that when you sacrifice, they call it, killed the little monkeys and froze their brains and did thin section evaluation of the brain, you would see these areas where the THC was depositing, brain, mammae, testes, the various different organs. THC is, at that level, is not good. And yet some people can somehow do it for a long time without it affecting them. So there are three wonderful groups of active things. So it is misleading, and I want to test who I treated here last year. Where is she here? Is Tess here? Okay. I saw her again today. She's teaching yoga. We did some wonderful flower essence work with her, and she pulled this out and she said, take a look at this. It's Queen City Hemp CBD seltzer. Right? So you're going to see CBD every place, and it's a ruse. It's ridiculous. And I'm going to tell you where that CBD is coming from. It's like the issue of getting vitamin C in Walmart. It's probably not going to be bioactive. All right. So you're going to be seeing CBD everywhere. It's already the largest. I have never, after 40 years, I have never seen so many lay people interested in a natural product as this. Never. I've never seen anything like it. And so it's still rising. The interest level is rising. There's three groups of active chemicals, and by putting all of them together, there's this amazing synergy that happens, because terpenes are in hundreds, thousands of plants. Phenolics are in thousands of plants. They're in wine, grapes. But cannabinoids, true classical cannabinoids, are only in the cannabis plant. And it is by putting those things together that you get these remarkable effects in the nervous system. So the cannabinoids are present in the little trichomes, the little, under heavy magnification, these little balls of oil that are in the terminal parts of that, on the leaf, or the tip of the flower, and on the leaves as well. And that's where the cannabinoids exist. And there's also essential oils in there, terpenoids too. So this is a pretty well-known diagram that summarizes the effects of CBD, which are just really profound. It's an immunomodulator, it's neuroprotective, it stimulates bone remodeling. It's quite remarkable. Terpenoids, the things like we would have essential oils and basil and pine and so on. And the most common recognized benefits of terpenoids is they're broadly antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory. Both drug type and fiber type industrial hemp contain a rich complement of nearly the same terpenoids, but just in varying proportions. So this is a quote. Now, I looked through, again, huge numbers of resources to try to get the most intelligent summary of what these things do. And I think these folks, I think this man is Dutch, and I can't pronounce his name properly, Harlingen, I don't know how you pronounce it in Dutch, but he was the editor of this book called Natural Terpenoids as Messengers. Now, it's big, it's a big book, a text. What makes terpenoids most interesting is the fact that they have a role in the regulation of signal transduction. What happens when something hits the cell membrane and we had some images already shown of that, where a cascade of events starts happening and it triggers things within the cytoplasm, within the cells, mitochondria, going into the nucleus and affecting RNA and the way that gene transcription can occur. So it can exert a profound effect on cell growth, differentiation, and programmed cell death, which is what needs to happen with cancer cells when you try and get rid of them, and multiplication. Terpenoids and other isoprenoids have important functions as messengers. So one of the takeaways is huge messaging situation going on when you put the proper substance. It allows the body to communicate, to get past the blocks, the metabolic road jams. So terpenoids and other within the important functions as messengers within organisms, within organs, and within the cell body, in particularly between the cell surface and the cell nucleus. They can influence cell stage and mitosis, resulting in changes in morphology and differentiation. Terpenoid end products can interfere with gene expression or more directly act as key enzyme regulators. And that's a mouthful if you realize biochemically what that means. But all of that is irrelevant if you have the wrong way of trying to approach preparing the product. You have these amazing things, but if you don't prepare them correctly, if you're using pharmaceutical technologies, as far as I can tell, generally speaking, you're going to see 95 or 98% of all products on the market are going to be touting the benefits of CO2 extraction. The CO2 extractors can be as tall as this room in the big facilities that are doing millions of dollars per day of the processing of hemp. It's a pharmaceutical technology that uses liquid CO2 under pressure. And what that does is it deactivates the bioenergetic magic of the cannabinoids. They're there. So they're there in a very pure form. The recovery is very high, and it is what? And here's the other big thing we got to recognize. Dollar sign. It's very lucrative to do that. And so in the 40 years that I've been involved in plant medicine, I have never seen so many investors lining up with $10 to $50 million wanting to throw their money at hemp extraction facilities. And they're all doing CO2 extraction because it's tried and true, and it's going around the world. And I don't even know where they're selling it all. I mean, we're producing thousands of pounds in this country of CBD concentrate made from tens of thousands of pounds of plant. And I'm sorry to say, it's just not the best way to do it, although it does help people. So people sometimes get tremendous help out of this stuff. So when I went to formulate my product, I bought all the leading brands that I could find. And in my office is a funny little place with bottles everywhere. So I bought all the brands that I could find. And then this is what I did, and this is how I try and do things. I had the good fortune of finding a company here in Kentucky that grows very high quality hemp from a good variety of plant. And that's the other thing, is hemp is extremely complex in terms of its genetics. So they were producing a very good quality bulk herb, and they also took the same substance and they ran it through their CO2 extraction and produced a concentrate. So what I did was I bought the plant, the raw plant from them, and I bought their finished product. I bought the concentrate, and I bought their finished product from the same plant. So I knew what I was working with. Then I took their plant and I did my extraction process. And I used that against their CO2 version. And that's where I started seeing the differences of what would happen if you used the exact same material, but you only changed the way of extracting it, right? You got to reduce variables, and that just makes sense. So let's carry on. Terpenoids, they're so important. Due to the fact that terpenoids are fat-loving, attracted to lipids, they have an affinity for biomembranes which function to prevent leakage of cellular contents into extracellular space, but also control the influx of material into the cell. If terpenoids come in contact with a pathogenic organism in the human body, the pathogen can be destroyed by increasing its cell membrane permeability. I never knew that until I did this research. I knew that essential oils were antimicrobial, we all know that, but I didn't know why. That's really interesting. That is one of the reasons essential oils show such strong antimicrobial and cytotoxic activity. Many terpenoids are even effective defense against membrane-enclosed viruses, and those are very hard to get rid of. Terpenoids can also modulate the activity of ion channels in the body. For example, essential oil of mint affects calcium channels and the motility of smooth muscle cells in the intestines, and cannabis essential oils do that as well. So the last group is phenolics. And flavonoid phenolics are one of the largest group of natural compounds. They have well-recognized health benefits, including modulation of inflammation, regulation of lipoxygenase and cyclooxygenase. Those are very inflammatory compounds. Detoxification of carcinogens and cancer prevention. Their antioxidant effect takes place by their scavenging free radicals and or by chelating metal ions. When flavonoids enter the human body, they are conjugated in the liver by glucuronidation, sulfation or methylation, or metabolized to smaller phenolic compounds. Currently, 26 flavonoids have been identified in cannabis. And the process that I developed uses very, very high quality olive oil to extract the substance. Olive oil itself is very rich in medicinal phenolics. And in fact, very good studies have been shown that the HER gene that codes for cancer, breast cancer, is reduced by phenolics in olive oil. So it just makes sense to use olive oil for that. Okay, so we got something here that takes 9 minutes, and then I'll still have about 15 minutes at the end to try and bring it together. So let's see if we can. What I try to do is to produce something much like our first two presentations this morning, to pull together, when we're seeing a chronically ill person, what's likely in the mix of the stuff that's affecting them, and it's pretty complicated. So let's see if this will, let's see how we can get this to play. Human Body Collapse Disorder, HBCD, Possible Prevention with Healing Hemp. Humans are capable of enormous adaptation to stressors via our central nervous system, the CNS, consisting of the brain and spinal cord encased and protected by the skull and spinal vertebrae, and the immune system, with its surveillance cells that electronically and chemically signal their protective activity to our nervous system. These contribute fundamentally to our well-being. In a cumulative manner, however, our magnificent inborn ability to resist stressors is being severely challenged by destruction of our natural environment. Industries discharging into our atmosphere toxic metals such as lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic, as well as sulfur, which turns into caustic acid in our body. Nuclear radiation is poisoning our oceans and air. Recent scientific studies indicate that herbicides used for genetically engineered crops are likely damaging human protein necessary for tissue, bone, and joint strength. Cell phone microwave, wireless internet, and satellite transmissions quite literally may be cooking our cells. With the experience of nearly 40 years of holistic health and preventive medicine practice, I see impending health threats in patients several years before they fully manifest. And what I am seeing in my patients reminds me of a terrible problem affecting honeybees called CCD, Colony Collapse Disorder. In the U.S., CCD killed over 25% of some bee populations in 2016. Previously mentioned environmental threats to human health must surely apply to honeybees as well. Microwaves from cellular phones have been shown to cause CCD within 10 days, apparently by affecting the bees' communication with the hive and disrupting their nervous system and navigational ability. Environmental pollutants that cause severe oxidative stress can cause imbalances in body oxygen, which likely triggers neurodegeneration in bees and humans as well. In early 2017, I coined a term for a serious, seemingly parallel human phenomenon, human body collapse disorder, HBCD. HBCD is often a constellation of subcomponent illnesses. Unfortunately, many or all of these can exist at the same time in one individual. In patients with chronic fatigue, chronic structural pain, and other long-term illnesses, some of the symptoms above are obvious, but neurotoxin illnesses, consisting of low-grade hidden infections from culprits like Lyme disease, are not obvious at all. They are core causes of many associated symptoms. Those combined challenges essentially shut down the body's ability to correct itself. That is where proper hemp extracts are amazingly helpful. They turn on the body's communication systems to enable healing. From the multitude of stressors that I see in clinical practice as core causes of HBCD, 3 structural factors often coexist. I've been fascinated to observe that healing hemp may well be a countermeasure to these serious destructive processes. First, inflammation and deterioration of the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Second, gradual, progressive destruction of spinal vertebrae from bone thinning and osteoporosis, and deterioration of the discs between them. Then eventual disc collapse and compression of spinal nerves. Third, an apparent attempt of spinal bones to fortify their weakening structure by growing osteophytes. Osteophytes are protrusions of bone between 2 sides of a joint that in time generally fuse and restrict our flexibility and movement, and can diminish nerve supply and muscle strength. Mainstream medicine considers this normal aging after age 40. These 3 processes are often occurring silently in our bodies. They essentially collapse our joints, and in so doing, they distort our acupuncture meridians that are so essential for total body balance and strength. Unexpectedly, in my holistic chiropractic practice, I developed my understanding of human body collapse disorder as a result of watching the ways that specially prepared extracts of industrial hemp were able to remove or lessen neurological and spinal complaints in my patients very quickly. When we look at just one part of the complex natural chemistry of hemp shown in this diagram that summarizes scientific studies, we see many references to protection of nerves, stimulation of bone growth, anti-inflammatory properties, and immune system stimulation. It helped me understand hemp's enormous healing potential. Then I had an epiphany to apply this organic olive oil extract topically, for I had the impression that it would help align the human body, balance physiology, and therefore increase resistance. The following video of me with the patient demonstrates what I have now seen with dozens of patients. I haven't seen Lori for a few months. She's been a good continuing patient, and you had a slip, you fell down some stairs. And what I found is by doing various neuromuscular tests and applied kinesiology, I found that if we go to her and we test in the knee here, I'm going to pull this way, be strong. And her muscle tone is really good. I tested her adductors, for example, pull strong. That's okay. That is not its normal strength. This is a pure form of pull strong. And it's really quite weak. If we go to, her adductors were good and strong, and push up and out. That's nice. You're working out with a personal trainer a couple of times a week. Okay, good. But her piriformis is weak. And when I did an evaluation, her sacrum went that way, sideways. So normally we would come around and do an adjustment as a chiropractor, and we would straighten the sacrum out. There's different ways of doing that. But here's what's sort of fascinating. Come on up. And now just hold your hair up and come on around here. And we come into that. The hemp itself doesn't really have such a great smell, but here, you can smell that. Isn't that nice? Mm. Not too bad.
Reminds me of college.
It's like a citrus, because we've got citrus oils in it, distilled essential oils. Okay, so what I pointed out before is the CB1 and CB2 receptors, the things that are the cannabinoid receptors, apparently are not in the brainstem area. They're just supposedly not there. So the point I've been making is there's more to this than just the CB1 and CB2 receptors. Okay, so we didn't even put it on your back, and we might need to, but let's see what happens. Bend this here, and the hands by your side, up there. Turn this leg in. Oops, hold it right like that. Keep it in that position, and don't let me push out. It's
wild.
Isn't that crazy? Wait. Okay. Now,
there's no way I could do that before.
You know, you didn't have any strength. Pull right back. Now, it's full strength. What the heck is going on? Now, we're going to apply it locally, too. But this is just trying to show people what happens. It just turns on the nervous system. Okay? Right? Okay, thanks. Those who are chronically tired often complain of neck, back, and extremity pain or weakness. They frequently have additional symptoms of hormonal imbalance and inflammatory digestive disorders. My fortuitous discovery of a novel way to extract and utilize healing hemp seems to be enhancing what is called the ensemble effect, commonly called the Entourage Effect. That is the amplification of hemp's total healing ability due to the synergistic functioning of the large range of its therapeutic components. Hemp has such an enormous range of therapeutic natural chemicals that can influence healing of so many areas of the human body that it is hard to believe. It looks as if nature has given us a gift in the form of the hemp plant to protect our bodies until we have the wisdom to restore balance to our beautiful earth. So I was actually doing that last year, and I did that with several people. I've done it so far today, and I'm out there sometimes at breaks, and if anybody wants me to play with that, I will do it. Well, here's where we got 15 minutes left. Thank you for the little sign there. That should be just about enough to really bring this together to what we need to know. So, human body collapse disorder. So what if there is a silent deterioration of the brainstem, neural tissue, and the spinal cord itself? The actual spinal cord running in the down the center of the spine, protected by bone on all sides of it, running in the central canal down to into the sacrum. What if at certain segmental levels, and it's going to vary with everyone, but especially we're seeing it in the upper cervical spine in the brainstem, what if there's a very silent destruction of that nervous tissue as a result of microwave and all the stuff that we've already seen from me in the other several presentations? What if that's actually destroying our nervous tissue and nobody knows it? And if that destruction by something called somatosomatic reflexes from one part of the body to another part, what if that's triggering the intrinsic muscles of the spine to become imbalanced or to alter their nerve supply so that they torsion the bones out of position, making what we call a subluxation in chiropractic? So when I applied this stuff, I applied that to her neck, and it influenced the the lumbosacral outlet of the muscles that innervate the piriformis, which is L5, some L4, L5, S1. But I didn't do anything to her legs, right? I didn't do anything. I applied this stuff up here. So the only thing it could have done was do two things. It could have massively stimulated cell signaling, and how? How? Well, it does it so quickly that it makes you wonder, because it'll do it sometimes within 5 to 10 seconds. So what's probably happening is it's happening on a vibrational level. And this is what I want to really finish talking about, because this is something that we've lost with our obsession with technology. I love the word appropriate technology, and I have spent many, many years, I spent from 1988 to 1992, 93, I went many times a year into the Amazonian basin, the Andes, the Peruvian Andes, and I spent a lot of time with native people. And that's been my greatest teacher. In one part of the high Andes, when you go into traditional medical systems, and you ask them, how do herbs work? They say it's three things. They say it's the environment where the herb grows, it is the shaman, the practitioner, and it is the patient. It's a triad. And each one of those is critically important. And that made me, when I ran into that, and this is all happening in Spanish, but I speak Spanish well enough to understand most of it, and that was explained to me. That's the traditional knowledge in one area of northern Peru, that it is these three things, and that's not unusual. You find that in traditional medical systems all over the place. That made me think of something that was in college when I was in anthropology, and I remember reading about it, a bunch of gypsies in Romania. And there was this one herb that was absolutely phenomenal, but they traveled days to pick that herb from under one bridge, because the herb didn't have the same effect anywhere else. Well, if you know about earth emissions, and if you know about, German medicine has explained a lot of that with, what's going on with the earth energetics and radiation from the earth, that could explain that. But what we must not lose sight of is the energetic, invisible component of our products. So when people are going to try to use industrial extraction techniques and pharmaceutical technologies, in most cases it's not warranted, and I wished it would stop doing. But it sells, and honestly the bottom line is it's highly lucrative. Our process is labor intensive. I mean, it's hands-on. And so let's see, how can we put this in another way? So motive is medicine. I did a lot of the study of ancient medicine. Motive is physical. Motive is medicine. And I want to make bundles of money because I have so darn many projects and I just want to be able to fund them myself. But the motive is not making money. But you got to make money or the company's not going to grow. We're going to make money. But when there's legislation now in Nashville, or in Tennessee, preparing the way for legalization of marijuana to be used for medical hemp, so high THC. And so when you go into these rooms, and I did that in the last few months, I just sat there quietly like a little mouse watching all these people. There 15 or 30 people show up, whole panel of investment bankers, all kinds of people dealing with major finance, and they're all sitting, and attorneys. There's 6 people up here at this thing that I was at. And I sat back and I just felt the energy of that room. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. The people were there because they knew they were going to make a huge amount of money. So that influences the medicine, particularly if we're putting it into the systems that people use here, which are subtle and must be. And it is at that level why I became obsessed for about 1 year to try and write on the quantum physics of the invisible. And that's the central section of my book called The Floral Hand of God. And I didn't bring that book. I'm sorry I didn't. I wished I'd had it in the books over here. But I would recommend looking at that because there's a little website called the floralhandofgod.com, and you can order the book and read some chapters. But I had a strange set of circumstances. I knew Dr. William Tiller when I was 19 years old because he had come to speak to a highly advanced clairvoyant that was my mother figure and my teacher and the person that pretty much saved my very dysfunctional early life. I lived in a community, an intentional community, with 10 years of that woman being the teacher and the great healer of souls. And Dr. Tiller had heard of this remarkable woman. Well, Dr. Tiller was a prominent physicist at Stanford University. And I knew of him when I was 19 years. So when I started writing this book in 2012, 40 years later, 30-some years later, I thought of Dr. Tiller, and he's a very hard guy because he's in very large and international demand. But I wrote him and I mentioned the name of this lady. And I said, I was one of her students, and I remember you. Could you help me? So he writes me back a letter. He says, yeah, give me a call. So Dr. Tiller was my science advisor for writing that second part of the book, which tries to explain with physics and science the levels in the invisible universe where it is like there's a template that takes place in the higher forms, the higher dimensions of our physical reality. And this is quantum physics. It's not speculation. But and Dr. Tiller, in my opinion, produced the best example and the most, I can't understand his math, but it was all proven mathematically. He wrote many, many texts, 4 major texts that are mind-numbing. They're very, very complicated. So I just went to him and I sat with him for a weekend and I said, please translate. What are you trying to say? So I was able to take his extraordinary difficult stuff and put it into terms that I think most people who are educated can understand. But the point is, we cannot ignore the so-called invisible realm. It's physical. It translates into the physical. And this was the basis of, and I've never been to the Paracelsus Clinic. I sure hope I get there at some point. But it's the basis of Paracelsian, the true Paracelsian medicine. The Swiss-born physician that died, I think, in 1542, born in the late 1400s, lived a short life. But he was a genius. And he, in his writings, and I read all of the books and recommend that to anyone, Understanding the Spirit of Healing, he wrote about true alchemy. So when we are working with these things, we have to understand the alchemy. So the process that I've developed for extracting hemp is still in process. It just keeps getting better. We're trying to work more. And so I test, and we're going to go into question and answer. Thank you again for my reminder. We got a couple of minutes. So we got 5 minutes. So let's any questions? I'd be happy to try and answer them. Yes? Yeah, now a good question. So, and I'm here to answer questions later, anytime you want to, but this is not a panacea, nor is anything. But if it does what I think, if it actually increases repair to a damaged spinal cord or brainstem, then that's a huge discovery. And I don't have enough doctors yet looking at this to conclusively say if that's true, but it's my impression that that's happening. So if you use it a lot for a while, you take it orally and transdermally, I saturate the body heavily for 4 to 6 weeks. You have to, if people have phase 1 or phase 2 liver detox problems, phase 1 is oil-based stuff. If they can't detoxify properly, they could test positive for a drug screening. So if someone's employment depends on random blood drug tests, the internet's saying it will not trigger a test. That's wrong. We've proven that wrong. It can in people with defective phase 1 liver detox. They can accumulate enough THC from taking this stuff after 4 to 6 weeks that they could trigger a positive test. So you have to let them know that. And unfortunately, if those guys, if their livelihood depends on it, that they cannot take the product if they have defective phase 1 detox. So I recommend it. And it is not a drainage remedy, and you do not want to use it in place of drainage remedy. One of our previous presenters, I can't say enough how wonderful that our performance or the presentation was, showing the study from the footbath, the ion cleanse. I don't think anybody still knows why that works. It is profoundly helpful. So I do that. I do all of the stuff that a lot of us are familiar with, but when I added this, it took out this apparent neurological deterioration. So I think one of the biggest things, I think it's protection against environmental destruction. And I think it should probably be pulsed. It probably should not be used consistently. Most herbal substances should not be used always. They shouldn't be used every day. And I get people to use it a lot. Yes, and then stop. I do a lot of biocompatibility checking. And so, things in pregnancy, of course, are, if they are abortifacients, you can't, abortive compounds, you can't use them. And I'm trying to think, I don't think that's part of cannabinoids' properties. I check stuff on people, and if it checks positively, I give it. I have that much confidence. So I don't know what the technical recommendations are. I don't think there's a problem. But I always tell everybody, use a bioenergetic assessment tool to check to see if the substance is compatible. And that could be anything from Vega test to muscle testing to all these other tools that we have, something that's reliable, okay? And so, yeah, I think it's okay. I'll tell you something. There is a scientist that I'll probably visit again in Switzerland that is the most advanced person that I know of that can actually graft that. He has a technology that's probably given him by space aliens. It's like nobody understands what he's doing, but he's got antenna that measure frequency emissions that are not in our normal spectrum. So he can measure all kinds of subtle stuff. And that's how you would do it. And you can graph it. You can show the hertz range and some of them are like, 20 million hertz. I mean, at very high gigahertz levels. So complicated question, but you can measure it, and he can tell. Fritz Albert Popp did stuff in Germany to measure biophoton emission. You can count that and you can measure that. So only a few people can measure that, but it can be measured. Any other questions? Yes. Very, very interesting question. There may have been an answer to that just came through by a fellow by the name of Harry Eidner. Harry Eidner is one of the minds behind Biotron, who's one of the distributors here that represent the Biotics products, which are very good products. And Harry's a friend, and he's going to distribute some of our products to his group of physicians. And I asked him, we went through this issue of why can't people tolerate this? And he said, I think I know the answer, Brent. I think it's because when you take it, it increases serotonin. And if people don't have adequate rubidium or lithium, they can't, their serotonin level builds up and they can't handle it. And I told him, send me a bunch of rubidium and lithium in low doses. And if people can't tolerate this, he said in his own case, he was feeling that he couldn't tolerate it. He added lithium and rubidium in low quantities, and boom, no problem. Very interesting. So I think the compounds in hemp, well, last thing, and then I'm going to have to go. But I had a patient that couldn't walk. I did everything I could. He still couldn't walk. He was a truck driver, and I had to send him home, driving 2 hours away. So I said, my gosh, I got to figure out how to give him this stuff. He's told me that when he took it previously, he knew that it helped him. He had to stop because it caused him to get severe allergic reaction. And if he hadn't taken Benadryl, he would have gone into an asthmatic, a breathing crisis. So I said to him, okay, so do you have your Benadryl with you before I send you back? He said, yes. I said, okay, are you willing to try this experiment? Let me put on some beads, some acupuncture beads into the area that will help to control hypersensitivity reactions. Histamine, there's a histamine point in the ear right up in here. So he said, okay. So I put those on there, and I really hurt the guy. It wasn't good, I really jammed on those things. And he's a big old guy, and he was jumping up and down. And then I rubbed this stuff all over him. Waited 10 seconds, and this poor paralyzed guy slowly stood up, started walking, turns around at me and looks and goes, it's a miracle. So then he starts driving back. We called him. I said, call me in about 30 minutes from your cell phone. And he said, you know, I started getting that itchy skin thing all over my arms and my legs, and I knew that that was a premonitory. He didn't use that word. It was a sign that, you know, this was coming, and I went and I jammed those points, and I'm fine. So I think we have a new thing. I think if people really need it, we can figure out ways to help their body deal with it, but some people, maybe 5% of the population, cannot tolerate hemp. When you give it to them, they'll get an allergic reaction. Yep, thank you very much.